Hello. On today's episode of Exploring Politics, we bring you a very interesting panel on ICE's withdrawal from Philly airports, the ceasefire in Iran, and the EU refugee bill. Please stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Exploring Politics. I'm your host, Peter Rapp, and today I'm joined by two wonderful panelists. Would you two like to introduce yourselves?
I'll go first. My name is Nicholas Holding. I'm a freshman political science major and pre-law minor here at LaSalle University.
Now, Gio?
Hi, my name is Giovanni. You've seen me on the show before. I am a sophomore majoring in history and political science.
All right, now I guess it's time that we just get into it. We got a lot of ground to cover today. So Nick, would you like to introduce your issue for us, please?
Well, my issue today is kind of a continuation of a previous episode's segment or issue, specifically with ICE and Philly airports. There's been a major update with this. ICE is now withdrawing from the airport, specifically Philadelphia International. This is a major change in the situation, as many thought that ICE would be there up until the very end of this partial government shutdown, but it seems to change. The interim CEO, Tracy Borda, announced in a city council meeting on Wednesday that ICE would be out come today, Thursday. Interestingly, the CEO was quoted saying a few specific terms, such as ICE agents were being very supportive in queue management, handling some exit lines, and advising passengers on what they're supposed to do. Additionally, Tracy also said that they had no issues with ICE at all, really. What this does mean is that it's an entirely different idea of what was originally perceived with ICE.
Yeah, now I wonder, there are multiple possibilities here. I think it is possible that ICE maybe wasn't really doing too much at the airports to interfere or impede with normal airflow and traffic. However, I think it's also possible that the CEO just does not wish to see any retaliation from this administration, as we've seen when people in positions of power have come out against ICE, or the fact that they're unhappy with how the administration is utilizing them. The administration has a propensity to retaliate, either through comment or some action that I think the airport CEO at this point would simply like to avoid. So I think that's a possibility as well. I think either way, we have, of course, the end of the holiday season. We just passed Easter and spring break for a lot of college students flying around the country. But for now, our airports are probably going to be a little relaxed up until the summer begins. So it could also be a factor of that as well. Gio, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I would say in some way that may be true. And I mean, you got to look at it. Certainly they definitely weren't put into the airports at a time when I think most people would expect them to be very busy. But I think that it does offer a very new and interesting perspective on things like this. Like especially, I'd say more in large settings, like airports especially, but ICE coming in and collaborating with local authorities. I mean, just a few weeks ago, we were terrified at the prospect of that. We were thinking, how is this going to look? What kind of further infringements are we going to see on people's rights, like we've seen in the past from ICE, going into smaller settings? But, it really is interesting to hear this almost, I would say, in some ways, refreshing perspective that, they were implemented. They were put in, especially at a time when there was a lot lower chance for risk, and things did work out well. As Nick was reporting, the queues were run a little efficiently, things like that. While this doesn't have a massive impact on American transport, and I don't know exactly what they were doing relating to deportations, it is a really interesting way to think about and see how can these institutions that have been so inflammatory to American politics start to interact back with American institutions, systems that we have in place in a more constructive way. Is that possible? I think that begs the question.
Yeah, I think there's also the potential here that, a lot of the issues that we've seen with ICE in the past couple months have been when ICE is leading the charge. They're the ones in charge. It's their jurisdiction. They're doing what they want, how they want to do it, with the short training that they have for their officers. I feel like that's when we see a lot of the chaos, a lot of the violation of people's rights, a lot of the things that American people have taken a lot of issue with. I think perhaps putting them into a setting where they are not enforcing necessarily, where they are not the ones who are required to be doing the work, but instead just supporting those who are in TSA and DHS officers that already work in airports that they've stationed there. When they're there to support, maybe it's better when we have something else controlling ICE. So that begs the question for me of why do we need ICE at all? If it's an independent agency that's, when it's given its independence to do what it needs to do, it messes up over and over again. But when it's used by other institutions, it performs as a supportive kind of actor. I think that it begs the question of, do we need it to be ICE, or should we instead allocate resources to other aspects of our institutions that need support, like the TSA?
Do we break them down, or do we just keep them as their overall body, what it is? The question also is, this seems very contradictory of what people believed with ICE entering into the airport scene in general. Because a while ago they were saying, oh, ICE was going to be cause much fear, only heighten the lines, cause utter chaos. But it seems with what the CEO said in a few specific quotes to other news outlets that they really didn't do this. It's frankly baffling if you think about what the public perception was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of those perceptions were based on how we have seen ICE act, in their element, when they're enforcing their jurisdiction. But when they're there on behalf of the TSA and simply supporting, I think that's the big change here. I think that's the influencing factor that made it so that they did not impede traffic in a large way. It's because the TSA ultimately just wants to get people through the airport. They don't want to have long lines. They don't want to be doing more work that they don't have to. So I think that it was probably a good operational choice on ICE's end not to make a whole big mess in American airports, because that's one way to get the public even more mad at you. So there was probably that as well, from high up in the command to not cause too many issues. But I feel like that it's good that this whole saga is coming to an end, because I could not imagine trying to retain ICE in the airports for the summer, when people are going to be traveling out of the country and back into the country at a much larger scale than they are now. So, Gio, do you have any final thoughts on this issue, or before we move on to the next topic?
I mean, I think it's been well said. You've both made very good points. Just when we look at these, I think I often do go back to the perspective that this is something we need to kind of sit and wait on. I think the sitting and waiting is done. I think that the proof of how that went and how it was facilitated, at least from, the comments we've seen so far from the CEO, et cetera, just goes to show, I think, the nature that we could see, I think, ICE and institutions like it most well deployed. But, with that said, I think you guys said it very well.
So yeah, now it's time to move to our second topic of the day, which is the ceasefire in Iran. Now, this comes after, I believe, the conflict has been raging on for 40 days at this point, as we're recording this on Thursday the 9th. So the question is, the ceasefire is supposed to be for 2 weeks. However, how long will it last? Will we achieve an actual deal at the end of it through these negotiations that we're having amidst the ceasefire? And what has kind of led up to this moment? So there's a couple things I want to focus on. There's the rescue of the airmen of the downed F-15 that happened, I believe, last weekend. This story is very interesting to me because the chain of events described by the administration do not add up or make sense to me in any way. This could just be, a personal failure to understand, but the airman is downed in one area, rescued 110 miles away in about 2 days after being injured in an airplane crash. I don't understand how someone travels that distance in that amount of time on foot in a hostile country. Also, supposedly, we sent in a whole bunch of troops to extract them on AC-130 planes, which got stuck in sand at an abandoned airport, and then we destroyed them to prevent them from falling into Iranian hands. Now, the Iranians claim, of course, that they destroyed the planes, and then destroyed American military helicopters as well. But we have reported 0 casualties in this conflict, or in that aspect of this conflict. And it just, the math doesn't seem to add up to me. An operation of such a large scale, with so much destruction of our equipment, I'm a little confused. Also, the airmen that have been rescued have still been unnamed. We have no idea who they are. We have not seen them. So I have no idea what's going on there, but it seems like there's something fishy going on in the administration, but that's not a surprise to me at this point. But moving on to the ceasefire more specifically, Iran is lifting Iran has its 10 points. It wants sanctions lifted. It wants to keep Hormuz. It wants the U.S. military out of the Middle East. It wants no attacks on Iran from America or its allies, so that includes Israel. It wants the unfreezing of Iranian assets, and it wants UN backing in securing this deal. Now, what do you think about these 10 points? Do you think that we're going to give them these points? Because if they get all of these, this is a total win for Iran. They'll end up controlling a good amount of the globe's oil supply. No more sanctions. They'll be free to kind of operate as the major power in the Middle East, especially if we pull out. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, when you go to the issue of permissions granted under the ceasefire and now our peace treaty that we're writing, this is unilaterally going to be, I think, we can all agree, a loss for the United States. It gets to a certain point where you're kind of holding the wolf by the ear, like we're doing all right. We've established some of our objectives in bombing their country. We haven't made any real gains against them, though, and I think they've been preparing this for about the 30 years that we've been at odds with them, the U.S. and its NATO allies. But what I mean with holding the wolf by the ear is, you've got it, and you can't let go, because it's going to bite down on you. But if you do let go, that's what's going to happen. So there's, I think, this fear of the U.S., and there has been for a long time, of what would happen if we took a few steps back from the Middle East, and from Iran especially. But I think we've reached a sort of point now where we can negotiate with them. We have put this conflict so on its nose that we have to admit that there are certain struggles right now going on in the Middle East, that maybe we're not as strong influentially there as we were a few decades ago. Maybe in some ways economically we are, but we've lost our influence there. I think we've lost our respect from different countries in the Middle East in terms of how we can cooperate with them. And certainly now that they're all coming under fire because of our war that we've waged with Iran, I don't think that those countries are going to be very willing to negotiate with us in the future. And if Iran is calling for us to get out of the Middle East, we might just have to, jump off the sinking ship as it's going down. I mean, that ship might be fine without us, but I think that's the whole point. I think we need to start becoming more comfortable as a country and our political administration with taking a few steps back. You let go of the wolf that you're holding by the ear, and goes off and does its own thing. I think
as soon as possible.
Exactly.
Nick, what do you think about this?
Honestly, with this, I am hopeful that we can reach some sort of agreement, but honestly, I don't think we're going to. It seems with our current administration, it's all utter chaos when it comes to this foreign war. He doesn't seem to know what he's doing. He doesn't seem to have any manageable goals. With this ceasefire, as you say, would be an overall win for Iran. I don't foresee our administration wanting that to happen. They'd much rather want to find a way to call this a win for themselves, but with the current points outlined, it doesn't seem like that would be much of a U.S. win.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Trump has already claimed victory multiple times. He has also claimed to declare war on them multiple times, which we've already been at. But Trump aside, I think that this conflict, I see it going one of two ways. I see it either raging on, continuing as it has. The ceasefire is either broken or it ends, and after the 2 weeks, and it just kind of continues with strikes back and forth on bases. I don't see a land invasion being possible or really on the cards at all. But the other possibility is there are, I must mention before I get into that one, the continued strikes on Hezbollah in southern Lebanon by Israel. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon that conflict I don't see ending anytime soon. There have been talks of negotiations, but they are not going very well there. However, talks between the U.S. and Iran I see as going somewhere material. We don't want to be in this war. Iran really doesn't want to be in this war. Their country has been destroyed. We've been bombing civilian infrastructure, threatening to bomb even more. Trump threatened to destroy a whole civilization, which I would argue is a U.S. president who believes in freedom and liberty should not be doing that. But I see that it's very possible that we get a deal with Iran. We exit, Iran exits, no attacks on Iran from Israel as they're an American ally, and that would probably be stipulated in any treaty that goes Iran's way with the 10 points. But I don't see the conflict between Israel and southern Lebanon ending anytime soon. I feel like that will go on for a very long time. I feel like it could just kind of split into two separate wars where we get out, Iran gets out, and then things in the Middle East are just continue as they are. We get to lick our wounds, Iran gets to rebuild with its better position given lifted sanctions, unfreezed assets, and U.S. military exit. So I feel like that could definitely be a way that the future goes.
And I mean, we've talked about this off and on quite a bit over the past few weeks, and I think the country has as a whole for the past couple of years. And I mean, I like a lot what you said about who has a stake here. We, as the United States, especially in Iran, don't have, I think, almost any reason, especially now politically, 40 years later after we've instigated so much of their political change, to be in that part of the Middle East. I think the only country who's involved in this war who really does have that vested interest has been Israel, and that's why you see the continued invasions of Lebanon. Just a couple months ago, Trump signed away the Golan Heights in Syria to Israel as a political territory. I think when you look at who is going to continue perpetuating this conflict and who has been, for a large part, diplomatically spurring this issue, it's going to be Israel, because of their vested interest in places like southern Lebanon, in places like the Golan Heights, as future political territories, oh my goodness.
Yeah, now unfortunately we're out of time on that issue, and we will certainly see very, very well how that develops in the coming days. But it is now time for our next topic. Gio, would you like to introduce your final topic of the show?
Sure thing. So just about exactly 1 week ago, on last Thursday, the 26th, the EU Parliament just released a bill that passed 389 to 208, calling for the return of migrants, especially those who are there under third parties, those who are there seen having no status or being held illegally, to return to their home countries, specifically places like Syria, Turkey, parts of Africa, which we've seen many migrants come up to, places like England, France, and Germany too in the last couple of years. But more importantly, what we're also seeing is that there's been a very recent push in the far-right parties like the AfD in Germany, far-right populist groups like those in Belgium, calling for the return of migrants who they believe as a threat to either the culture or the economic success or the political stability of their countries, becoming a lot more relevant now that we're hearing them get recognition in the European Parliament. And what does this mean for the US? I think that we are going to see a little bit more of those calls for stricter immigration control now that we mirror the political shift that the EU is taking. But I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts.
Yeah, I think that the shift towards the far right in Europe is not really a surprise. We see it happening here in America, and I think the expression is when the U.S. sneezes, England catches cold. That's how I've heard it before. But I think it's also very reasonable to say that when the U.S. sneezes, Europe catches a cold. I mean, all of Western Europe and the EU at this point pretty much have been, for the past couple decades, operating as under the U.S. kind of sphere of influence. We control essentially global capital markets. We are the predominant economic player, predominant cultural player. We have Hollywood. We have all of social media that is used across the world comes from the U.S. So I think America has such a large cultural and economic power that any movement that we see here in America, it's not a surprise when there's similarities that emerge in Europe. So I think the far-right shift that we see in America that brought Trump into power, especially with Trump 2, I think that's what we're seeing in Europe today. I mean, there was the original far-right shift in the mid-2010s that I would liken to Trump 1 and the far-right shift here. But this new kind of far right that we're seeing with the AfD gaining a significant amount of power is very similar to how we kind of saw Trump 2 come into power with, a surprising amount of support as people, I think, are growing increasingly unhappy with the status quo. That does not mean that I think that these people are right in any way. I just think that they're unhappy, they're discontent, and they're looking for someone to blame. And they're choosing to blame immigrants, when in reality, I feel like our system as a whole is experiencing the failure of deep, integral, foundational parts that we do not know how to operate without, and we are now looking for someone to blame. The truth is that it is our system to blame, and that we need to be working to reorganize and rebuild the way that we operate for the modern world and the way that modern technology allows us to trade and to interact with one another. I think that it's not necessarily a problem of migrants. I think that, for refugees that were fleeing war in Syria, the war has technically ended, so legally I understand how they can be sent home. But I think that blaming the problem of Europe on migrants there's no truth to that.
I would say to some degree, I see your point, but I would have to disagree just in the sense that I think the situation with immigration in Europe is very unique in comparison to that of the United States. And I think you see that's where our policies sort of differ from theirs. But just in the case of this migrant bill that was recently passed, already countries like Greece, Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, and Denmark have put forward their policies and are working with these third-party return governments already. You see a sort of eagerness in these populations, I think, and their governments to kind of right this issue that they feel is so wrong. And to some degree, whether or not that's completely legitimate, I mean, you've seen that center-right and even center-left parties were working with the far-right on this bill. I mean, like I said, even you look at the vote count, it was fairly popular. It wasn't by any close margin. I think about almost 180 votes out of the total 500 in the European Parliament to win. But just with that considered, I mean, I think that there has been, to some degree, a very reasonably concerning amount of illegal immigration to Europe in a way that I think is very unique compared to ours. I mean, for ours, there's a physical land border in the US that we have as our kind of point of contention with immigration. But then when you look at Europe, the large amounts of people coming from North Africa, either if it's on boats or on certain land borders through Turkey, I think that there is a lot more that they can do, I would say, than we can to kind of call for repatriation of certain migrants. I think that in America, a lot of the migrants here are a lot more enshrined in our culture and our legal protections. But I mean, I'd like to hear more about what you think about it, too.
What are your thoughts on this? I haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah. Mainly, I think Europe's using the migrant issue as a scapegoat again. It seems anytime there's an issue within many European countries, it's always blamed on the migrants. It's always the refugees are causing the problem. Sorry
to interrupt, but if you look to England, for example, there was a large push against Polish immigration. There's a large Polish community that goes to England to work, find work there, and in the past, English politics has been very against that. I think that supports your point and what you were talking about. You continue.
Yeah, where was I with the scapegoat thing? Everywhere in the EU, or in the EU specifically, it always seems to, not everywhere in the EU, but many countries are trying to just use the migrants as a scapegoat. They're always attacking them as their problems within their country always come from the migrant itself. Who do we know for exactly 100% sure is that actually is where it's coming from, or is it just the system failures? You were saying that I feel like it's in that weird middle ground, because what do we know? Because what people keep trying to use the migrants as the scapegoat, but then there's a system failure, but there's probably also some support of the...
I mean, I think that the migrants coming to Europe in the first place is a consequence of Europe's historic exploitation of the global South and of these people's home countries. I mean, if you look to Syria, that is a war that raged on for many years. We pumped tons of money into it. Russia pumped tons of money into it. Europe had its backings. If you look to Africa, a lot of African immigrants are coming from nations that were previously colonized by European powers. North Africans moving to France is not surprising, as they had Algeria for a number of years. So I think what we're seeing is changes that are built into consequences of the system. So unfortunately, that is all the time we have for that issue today. But we do have time for our final thoughts. So Nick, would you like to go first with your final thoughts in 30 seconds?
Yep. Currently, it seems that the ICE in Philadelphia airports has drastically changed. It is no longer the perceived effects of what ICE would have done turned out to be false. They seemed as more of an administrative aid in the whole debacle of the TSA situation, but it's overall interesting.
Yeah, Gio, your final thoughts?
I mean, while I can't speak much on the Philly issue, I would say that in Iran and global politics, at least, things are looking up. I think that we realized, especially with the war in Iran, that it was something we never really wanted to be involved in. I think that we're trying to pull out as carefully as we can right now, but also, you know, with all those global issues involved, I think that that's just going to be something we have to give a little time to. You know, who knows how that could go.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing here in the world, but also at home and right here in Philadelphia, is we're seeing these big conflicts that have been seeming to boil up across the globe. We're seeing them reach a point where it really could go either way. The American position on ICE, the American public does not really like ICE at the moment, given everything that they've done. And ICE is now trying to rebuild their image, trying to operate within those systems. With Iran, we're trying to get out of it, trying to resolve this as peacefully as possible. I hope, at least. You know, you never know with this administration. And with the EU refugee bill, trying to, you know, send back refugees who came here trying to escape wars that are now over. So I think that what we're seeing is an attempt at resolution. But I also am aware that things rarely go as they seemingly should. So it's always important to have these conversations. Please tune in next time. Follow our Instagram at Exploring Politics LTV, and have a nice weekend. Stay tuned.